Hey guys, Sunny here. When it comes to different types of cards in a card game, it usually doesn't extend much further than your minions, spells, and legendary cards. Some cards create early game value, some cards are late game bombs, some effects are everything I could dream of in a single card, some cards are exactly the opposite of that. Designers try to create new and exciting effects every single expansion. New cards can bend all known rules of the game and create crazy new interactions, but they still function within the predefined rules of the card game. And that's kind of the benefit of being a virtual card game. You can do these kind of crazy and new effects without requiring players to read a book to make sure they understand new mechanics. But it doesn't even stop there. Beyond wacky and never before seen effects, it's possible to invent entirely new card types. Hearthstone did this with their hero cards, for example. You replace the hero you're currently playing with a new one for additional effects and a new hero power. That's not a spell or a minion. That's something entirely different with new implications. A card like that works in Hearthstone, but not in Runeterra because we have no heroes. Best we can do is turn Gromp into Nightshade Gromp. It's entirely new cards like this though that keep card games fresh and exciting. Legends of Runeterra did give us a new type of card eventually, and well, as you might be able to guess, they didn't quite have the desired result and broke Runeterra as we knew it. There are 3 different types of cards in Runeterra. Followers, the classic minions that will make up most of your deck, then there's spells to protect or kill units, and champions. And that last category usually being the cards you build your entire deck around. This used to be the case, but a new card type was introduced last year during the Monuments of Power expansion, Landmarks. These cards were either completely unplayable or absolutely broken. Oh, but hey, let's not forget about Howling Abyss though, the single most important card for my entire YouTube career. Landmarks are supposed to represent important locations in Runeterra and have unique game-changing effects. So landmarks take up a spot on the board like units, but they don't have attack or health and can't block or attack. Because of that, the problem becomes that these cards can't be removed in the same way you'd remove a unit, which makes sense because you can't just sling a Targon's peak into the battlefield. So in order to interact with them, Runeterra released new cards that specifically have the text destroy a landmark. We even got this absolute chat of a follower who can just capture a whole damn university, implying she just lifts it up and puts it in her back pocket. One landmark that was released among the initial bunch stood out though, the Star Spring. Now, I know what you're thinking if you ever played against Star Spring decks. The landmark literally has the text win the game on it, which can make it very frustrating to lose to. But I'll play devil's advocate here and say that this deck is actually the perfect execution of a win con landmark. Tahm Kench and Soraka plays like a mid-range deck that focuses on defense with big chunky units, wide boards, high HP, and healing effects to keep everyone alive and healthy. Soraka is the value generation and Tahm Kench and Boxtopus are the removal. And this kind of concept would never be able to exist if Starspring was a unit instead of a landmark. The issue and frustration with playing against Starspring is that if you can't remove the landmark, it feels like an inevitable loss. Eventually, the Starspring ticks to 22 and then it's game over. But players tend to forget that it's still possible to interact with the board of units to stop them from healing or reaching 22. Starspring is a deck that has to be built in a very specific way. It's a pre-built deck, so it's real unfortunate to see the Kench benched every time Starspring isn't playable, because he can't be used in any other deck. But that does mean that the one deck he is supposed to be very good in can have real strengths and weaknesses, because you're required to have synergies and specific healing cards. It's the same for a Fiora deck. You have to play strike and buff spells to keep your Fiora alive and able to win games, but he's still vulnerable to silence and transform effects. Do you think the Fiora player ever had a chance against any deck with Minimorph? No. And I'm not really mad about that because losing to Fiora's alternate win con sucks, but at least a unit is something you can interact with. Starspring, on the other hand, is considered frustrating because if you can't touch the landmark, it gives a feeling of helplessness. So just let me Minimorph this entire goddamn building! Another side effect that makes landmarks frustrating for the player using them is that double drawing them feels so bad. You really don't need a second Scargrounds or University. I paid good mana for the first one already. A solution for this might be transforming additional copies of the landmark into a unit, much like how a second champion will turn into the champion spell. Just transform the second Scargrounds I drew into an unscarred Reaver or something. So yeah, landmarks were a complete frustrating mess in the months after release. But little did we know that the region that was about to be added to the game would turn landmarks into one of the most fun and interesting card types in the game. Region number 9 turned out to be Shurima. Huge surprise, I know. It was literally the largest area on the Runeterra map that wasn't in the game yet, and landmarks were going to play a big role in the region identity. Before, landmarks had persistent effects and took up a spot on the board for the remainder of a match. So playing a board-centric deck was already weird because a card like Grand Plaza wouldn't allow you to play more than 5 units. But Shurima, the saviors that they are, gave landmarks a new functionality. Countdown effect. A card with countdown 2, for example, would activate an effect after 2 turns passed, freeing up a space on the board. This completely fixed the awkwardness of landmarks. So many new, cheap landmarks that were fun to experiment with, like Preservarium, Ancient Preparations, Emperor's Dais, and a card like Frozen Thrall to spawn an entire archetype. Also, a Frozen Thrall is a landmark, huh? This is an important location in the world of Runeterra. I'm not complaining. I just think it's funny when you put this frozen boy next to a gigantic structure like the Grand Plaza. The most interesting landmark among the Shurima structures was the Sun Disc, a meme deck that quickly became a fan favorite. Azir, Nasus, and Renekton had more than just a single level up. They were able to ascend to level 3 by restoring the Sun Disc, counting it down all the way from 25 to 0. That was life before the Bandle City expansion. Eventually, Shurima got a 4th Ascendant called Xerath, and you know exactly where this is going if you played Runeterra in the past month. But in case you don't, I found this videotape with lost footage from our planet I'll go ahead and play for you. This is Azir, Emperor of Shurima, and this is Xerath, being of pure arcane energy. Azir and Xerath were childhood friends. Well, they used to be friends, but some stuff happened and they turned rivals. Both of them only have one goal in the game Legends of Runeterra: Ascension. But will they get it? Our first specimen, Azir, summoned soldiers called Sand Soldiers. As for Xerath, he likes to shoot blue, energy-loaded projectiles. What is special is that these projectiles in the Runeterra card game are in fact not blue. They are standard, commonly used pink projectiles. After progress has been made on a level up of both champions, it is time. Restoration. A simple trick, yet a very dangerous one, if used correctly. For the special level 3 ability, Azir will replace the deck of cards, and Xerath will prepare his array of lightning bolts, which results in obliteration, specifically on the enemy side of the board. Okay, thank you to the narrator, Hyrule Addict, whoever that may be. Xerath changed Mono Shurima completely, but the deck didn't always have his ability to make the deck consistent. Let me take you back one more time to look at the history of the Sun Disc. Azir used to be the only Ascendant that levels in deck and could be dropped on the board as a level 2 champion to instantly count down the Sun Disc by 10. But without Xerath, that wasn't nearly enough to get to 0 from 25, so you needed either Renekton or Nasus to consistently restore the disc. To everyone's shame, the brothers were almost impossible to level up because of their strike condition, making the deck far too inconsistent. Also, please sign my petition to rename Strike to Bonk for all Shurima champions. You can find the signing paper on my Twitch channel. Thank you. Mono Shurima was a blast to play, but very far from competitive viability. Fast forward to August 2021. The Bandle City expansion added Xerath as the 4th Ascended champion, able to hit level 3. More importantly, Xerath, just like Azir, was able to level up in deck and come down as a level 2 champion if the requirement was met. Renekton and Nasus were once again left in the dust. Or, well, Renekton was left in the dust because Nasus was in a very good deck with Thresh. It wasn't long until the horror would begin. Fast forward another few months, and Riot buffed Azir to make his level up work with landmarks. Suddenly, you were able to have both Xerath and Azir leveled on turn 6 consistently to instantly get to their immensely powerful level 3 form and win the game on the same turn. The beloved fan-favorite Mono Shurima deck quickly became one of the most frustrating experiences to ever grace Runeterra. It was no longer a question if you'd see the Shurima movie or not. It was inevitable and would happen far too early in a game. Being forced to watch 4 level up animations, instantly getting your board obliterated on top of the enemy deck getting replaced with even more powerful cards was not a great experience. Every Runeterra player remembered Mono Shurima as the lovable underdog deck that only chats would play. So when it was the best deck in the game, everybody played it. We went from being a card game to being the next goddamn Avengers movie. And don't get me wrong, this really didn't come out of nowhere. Mono Shurima got better bit by bit with buffs and new cards over the course of several patches, but the Azir buff pushed it over the top. And again, this entire archetype is possible because it's tied to a landmark, which is great. The problem is that you can't interact with Xerath and Azir to stop the Sun Disc from restoring because they come down level to guarantee the -20 on the countdown. Starspring, on the other hand, can only tick up towards the 22 if there are minions to heal. Eventually, we did get a nerf to how fast the Sun Disc counts down when a champion levels, but unsurprisingly, that'll just make the other Ascendants that don't level in deck feel even worse. Shurima wouldn't be nearly as frustrating to play against if it was Nasus or Renekton that were necessary to restore the Sun Disc, because they need to strike for 10 damage, and thus can be interacted with. Kinda makes you think that instead of nerfing the Sun Disc, maybe just unleash a Void Invasion on it or something. Anyway, the pattern with landmarks is becoming pretty clear. The issue is interaction, which is much harder to find when it comes to landmarks. And a bigger problem then becomes that there's only one kind of interaction, and that's straight up destroying a landmark. This forces the design of counterplay options into direct removal, and that's the worst kind of counterplay because it's specific and swingy. A landmark meta forces you to include spot removal that's probably going to be a dead card in all other matchups. And as a result of that, it makes you play high variance games where the only thing that matters is your ability to draw the correct card. And increasing the availability and efficiency of landmark removal wouldn't fix the game. It would lead to even more problems. Archetypes that can only exist in Runeterra like Thralls would be impossible to play because they just get caught in the crossfire. But even though Shurima happened later on in the timeline, the biggest problematic landmark, and just by saying the name I'm going to instill fear in anyone who hears it, was Bandle Tree. To me, the Bandle Tree is the kind of card that makes a card game frustrating and unfun to play on every single level. I don't want to go into too much detail because I talked about the card already in this video, and the card was nerfed, rendering it pretty much unplayable. But because we had to deal with this card for more than 6 months, let's look at why it was such an abomination. Bandle Tree was a deck that won games with a combination of Unit Swarm, incredible card generation, extremely good removal, high tempo plays, mana cheating, burn, manifest high rolls, and stalling tools. And I didn't even start talking about the landmark yet. As if that incredible toolbox wasn't enough to make up a competitive deck, it was also backed by a landmark that will win you the game without even being on the board once you've met the requirement. This is where landmark design is at its most problematic. Complete uninteractive win cons like Bandle Tree. And Starspring is in this category too, but it's in a much healthier state because it needs you to have and keep a specific board state. I've seen people say that it should be fine for these type of stall win conditions if you can stop the opponent's aggression, and that's absolutely correct if your deck is called Darkness, Feel the Rush, or Viego. They stall the game and do something incredibly powerful for a large mana investment. And all of that without a line of text that simply states win the game. This line of text and Feel the Rush or Glorious Evolution could essentially mean the same thing, because a card that powerful resolving will often have the exact same outcome, but it's exciting and awesome when it happens. On the contrary, the game just ending because a condition was fulfilled that you had no say in feels bad and frustrating. As soon as a unit from a missing region is played, that's that. That's +1 to the requirement, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. I'm grateful the deck got nerfed to being unplayable, but as bad as it is, the fundamental problem is still there. The text to win the game is on a card that is difficult to interact with, and you can't stop your opponent from simply playing the units and getting closer to growing a tree or something. I don't even know what this animation is supposed to represent or why it's making me lose. No. Okay, so that's the negative about landmarks. Let's look at some of the positives too. And that basically comes down to countdown landmarks. There are some generally good landmarks like Preservarium and Blighted Ravine, but their true value really shows when you look at a deck like Thralls. A deck that sets up this 1 mana landmark and plays combo pieces to summon multiple copies, duplicating them with Talia and make them count down as fast as possible. Other cards like Zillion and Zerath who make up a beautiful landmark control deck with Arsenal as their win con. And once you explode a time bomb with Zerath on the field, it stops feeling like you're playing a card game and more like you're playing a shooter. Of course, lastly, one of my favorite decks in the game, Talia and Ziggs. An off-tempo deck with a lot of burn options to finish games. Turbo level your champions, create high-tempo plays, and pick off enemy units with vulnerable. And when you get the chance to end games like this, there's really nothing quite like it. Also, with the new expansion, Riot is releasing Hellstone cards for every region. Yeah, I got that Ionia tryharder. Basically 3 sisters, but for every region in the game. Shadow Isles and Piltover have historically struggled with landmarks because their landmark removal felt pretty bad to main deck, but when it's on a flexible card where you don't have to feel awful for putting it in your deck because it'll only be good once every 10 matches, is a lovely solution to the landmark problem. Well done, Riot. I'm really happy with this one. Yeah, I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with landmarks. They definitely made the game a lot less balanced, but infinitely more interesting because concepts like Thralls, Starspring, and Sundisk would never be able to exist otherwise. Spending unit mana on a card that does nothing on play but getting the tempo back later when the countdown is complete is a really cool mechanic and makes for a lot of unique decision making. Legends of Runeterra was always the card game that praised itself for interactiveness and the back and forth between players. This standpoint was shattered by the introduction of landmarks. We traded interaction for, honestly, pretty sweet and interesting deck concepts that would break the game from time to time. And was that worth it? You decide. Before I end the video, I'd like to shout out Mastering Runeterra, a website with fantastic articles, tournaments, and learning calls, and you can use code Snnuy for 10% off of subscriptions. Lastly, a huge thanks to Lady MC, Pepscola, Raran, Solly's Crown, and The Legend 27 for their help with clips, information, or feedback on the video. I really hope you guys had fun. Make sure to let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.